Hello, you guys, and welcome to another episode of the Danielle K Show. I am so excited and honored, honestly. I have Dr. Samantha Hart here, and welcome. I know we're doing this like virtually. We met briefly here in Miami at an event with Dan Fleischman and a bunch of other amazing people, and I knew you had a good story, so I'm like, Amber, get her on the podcast because anybody who has a good story, it's so empowering to share it because I believe that it sets people free and ultimately helps them. So we briefly were kind of, talking before this show, and I'm like, we got to stop. We got to stop. We got to save it for the show. So welcome.
Hey, you guys, it's Danielle K. White. Welcome to the Danielle K. White Show. On this podcast, what you can expect is anything from fashion, fitness, hair, and yes, even family. I'm the creator of Natural Be to Real hair extensions and Isla hand-tied hair. But what I'm really passionate about is sharing other people's stories, how they went from the pit to the peak, how entrepreneurs build the success that you see online today. So definitely tune into this podcast for a good story and a little bit of fashion and a little bit of hair and beauty mixed in.
Oh, it's so good to be here. I absolutely loved being near you and Garrett. And when you and I get into some of my story, you're going to understand why I just said that, because my husband and I have an unbelievable story to redemption, if you will. And that's just a tiny little piece of why I'm sitting here now talking to you. But it's amazing the work you guys are doing, and I'm very, very excited to be here.
Oh, thanks. Thank you for being here. So let's dive into your story. Let's go. How long have you been married, first off?
Oof. Well, we've been together for 22 years,
Okay.
which is nuts, right? Because we were kids when we met, and we've been married since 2011.
Okay.
So we've been in it.
Yeah.
We've been fighting.
You fight.
for a
Say that's
long
what I always say.
time.
You got to stay in the fight. Like I guess when the fight gets quiet, that's when you should be a little nervous. But that's Garrett and I've been together for 23 years, married for 21 years. So it's like,
There you
whew,
go.
yeah.
Yep.
It's once you're like 20 years in, you're like you're my person, like through thick and thin. Like it's crazy. So let's go
It's
back to. I know that like right now you started your journey in physical therapy, correct?
Yes, I did.
How long have you
I
been
did.
practicing that?
I got my doctorate in 2010. And, honestly, the thing I really wanted to do was to sing and dance. I
Oh,
was
really?
really gunning for a record deal when I was young. But not only did I not have the emotional support from my mom, who in my case growing up was God to me. It's not that she shamed me out of it, but she was so afraid of her daughters not following the status quo and getting the good grades and the fancy degree and the stable job, because she never had any financial stability. But because there wasn't that backing from her, coupled with a perfectionist disposition. So you could imagine if I had a terror of failure, and the entertainment industry is known for rejecting you.
Yeah.
I had no resilience internally to handle what I was confronting, and at the same time I was engaging in what would become a raging cocaine addiction.
Oh, wow.
So it wasn't going to really work out for me at that time in my life. I will say, if we get all the way forward into today, I am singing on stages again, which is
Wow.
just unbelievable because I'm 42 with two children
Yeah.
at home, right?
Oh,
So
wow.
you could never have told my 19-year-old self that was like, move over, Britney Spears, I'm coming.
Yeah.
And the whole thing got taken, that I would be here again
Wow. How long were you
doing
in
what I love.
how long were you in the music industry for?
Oh, I was in that fight, I want to say, not for too long, a few years. I mean, because in tandem, as I was trying to pursue it, I was living in Manhattan. I'm from Brooklyn, New York. So I
Okay.
moved to Manhattan halfway through college, took a year off, and thought, this is it. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a star. And in order to survive at 20 years old in Manhattan, what do? You get a bartending job. So you could audition during the day.
Right.
And so I grew up in a house where drinking and using and popping prescription pills was completely normal.
Oh, wow.
And I also was such a good little soldier controlling the world around me. So none of it ever felt abnormal. No drink or drug felt strange for me to try, nor did I ever believe in any capacity that I would lose control over it.
Wow.
And within a couple of years, drinking and cocaine became synonymous with one another. And, just to capture the level at which I was functioning and how so many addicts function, which is what makes it particularly dangerous, is on the day of my acceptance into my doctoral program, because school was safe and entertainment was not, right? So I really started to default to what I was good at and what I could control. If I studied hard enough, I was going to get an A. If I got enough A's, I was going to get into the program. If I worked hard enough in the program, I was going to get a doctorate, and then damn, I made it. Dr. Hart, how amazing is that, right? So I was still chipping away at getting these courses and A's and degrees while my cocaine addiction was getting really severe. And on the day I was accepted into my doctoral program, I overdosed.
Oh, wow. Wow.
That's the level at which I was functioning. And by the way, it would take me another year and a half before I even attempted sobriety, but that still wasn't bottom.
Did you feel like you were in control the whole time?
After I overdosed, I was extremely scared. So what I knew at that moment was I was losing control over drugs and alcohol, particularly drugs. So I did what addicts do. I was like, well, I can't do cocaine anymore.
Right.
That's obviously the problem, right? So then I tried to drink and not do cocaine. That didn't work. So then I said, okay, well, if I can't do those two things, then I can probably just take prescription pills and any sort of concoction and smoke a lot of weed. And that worked until it was all the time, every day, every night. And I was still getting straight A's, by the way. And the guy I was dating, who is now my husband, was with me during my active addiction, all the cheating, all the lying. And he caught the bottle of prescription pills that my father was driving into Manhattan to give to me, because that's part of my story. My dad was the enabler in my family.
Oh, wow.
And he held them up and he looked at me like, are you fucking kidding me that you're still doing this? Because to him, I had partied really hard. I had been very reckless, but I was sort of calming down. I was a tamed version of myself. And compared to cocaine, Xanax does tame you, but I was completely out of control, just with different substances. So I got spooked again, not fully into the reality that I needed to be sober, but that this man was going to leave me if I didn't.
Right. Why do you
And so I went to another meeting. That was the beginning.
I mean, my husband has a very addictive personality, and I do a little bit, not as much as I would say he does, but I've asked him several times. I'm going to ask you the same question. What is it something where you're sedating, or has it become a pattern that you just can't get out of the loop?
It's both. So it's one and then the other. Right. So I didn't, what I'm going to tell you now is what I now know, sitting here at 16 years sober, having done a shit ton of work on myself and many years of therapy. There was so much instability in my house growing up. My mother has mental illness and she was an untreated addict. My father was the enabler. My sister was a very unsettled teenager, very angry, using drugs and sex to seek attention. So for me in my home, what I learned to do was become whatever anybody needed. So the very first thing I learned was to self-abandon and people please, to make sure everyone else was okay at the expense of myself, right? The other thing that was happening is that I had a voice inside my head that was always telling me, you're never enough. So not only was I not seen by my caregivers the way that I needed to be seen. And when I would try to assert myself and ask my mom, for example, why do you take those pills every night? That's my earliest memory. I must have been 4 years old because it scared me when she did. She became somebody else.
Yeah.
And she shut that shit down. She said, do you like the things that you have? I'm 4. So of course I'm going to say yes. In order for me to give you the things that you have, I need to work. In order for me to work, I need to sleep. In order for me to sleep, I need to take these pills. It was like, do not ask me that again, right? Yeah. So why do I say all this? Because when you couple that type of upbringing where I'm shape-shifting to make everyone all right, and then when I'm by myself, the overriding voice is, do better,
Mm-hmm.
try harder,
Mm-hmm.
not enough.
Right.
You better believe I'm going to anesthetize that.
Mm-hmm.
So what I was doing was filling the void inside of my heart,
Mm-hmm.
and the love and validation that I needed, that I was seeking from my family and my caregivers, I did not receive.
Right.
So drugs and alcohol, unbeknownst to me for a long, long time, were a solution to the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Then they become the problem
Right.
itself,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
Then it becomes so reinforced on a chemical level
Mm-hmm.
that I'm literally dependent on it.
Right.
But once you break the chemical dependency, right? Once you become physically sober, even for a short period of time,
Mm-hmm.
if you do not arm yourself with spiritual tools,
Right.
you are in deep, deep trouble. And
Right.
I can tell you all about that part of my story, because rock bottom, you would think, would be the overdose.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how much more serious does it have to be
Right.
than almost losing your life, right?
Right.
But I literally did cocaine off my sister's fingernail the next day.
Wow. Wow.
That was not rock bottom.
Mm-hmm.
Rock bottom is not only unique to the person, it is
Mm-hmm.
not a thing anyone can force upon somebody else ever, no matter how serious the consequences. Number one. Number two, it's spiritual
Yeah.
in nature.
Yeah. You said something interesting. You know, you felt like you were raised where you were never enough, never enough, never enough, never enough. And there's this kind of like allusion to this perfectionism that doesn't exist, you know? And I find it's a catch-22 because I'm a little bit that way too. I am the perfectionist, but I find like most overachievers or most people that do a lot in life, there's this piece of them like growing up, whatever it is, like I'm never enough, I'm never enough, I'm never enough. And so it's like, yeah, it's hard that you had that narrative when you're younger, but how do you now as an adult? You're like, I am enough, but I still like it took that kind of that feeling to be an overachiever. And now you have like these patterns and behaviors. You see what I'm saying? Like now
I do.
it's a part of you. So how do you become an overachiever if you weren't raised with like, cause I had a similar situation. My mom was like, everything was like perfect. So I always just felt like it was never enough, you know? And I think growing up in that has made me produce and do the things that I do today. So speak on that a little bit. Cause I think a lot of women suffer with that. Like, honestly, that's like, they're never enough, whether it's to their kids or their husbands or their job. Why do we have this innate feeling of like, I'm never enough?
Oh, I have so much to say about this. So here's where I'm going to start. Perfectionism, like so many other character traits, has assets and liabilities. And culturally speaking, I was the most productive human on earth. But spiritually, I was bankrupt. And perfectionism collapses in matters of the heart. And here's what I mean. I ran in sobriety off of my ability to perfect the world around me. On the outside, I was 5 years sober. I had my doctorate. I had a private practice. I had a nice apartment in Manhattan and then in LA when we moved to California. I mean, I was married. Like, check all the boxes. I was winning at life. And turns out the repercussions from cheating on my then boyfriend and now husband in the beginning of my addiction that we didn't mend or heal or discuss showed up on the front end of our marriage. And so I'm sitting here thinking, oh my God, this man fucking stayed with me. I'm so lucky. And we can finally start our lives in this new chapter as young 30-something-year-olds wanting to start a family. And sure enough, we're not sharing our finances. He's rejecting me sexually. He is pulling away emotionally. And I go insane. And by going insane, I mean, I am sober. I'm going to 12-step meetings. I don't believe in a God, by the way, because my mom told me there's no such thing.
wow.
So I'm fighting the program, but I'm doing some of the work where I feel like I can. But really, the steps were asking me to unwind my entire identity of controlling the world around me. It was saying, you need to give up control, Sam. And I was like, fuck if I do.
Yeah. Because you feel like you're a
Look
failure.
at what I've done. But also, this shit kept me safe when I was young, and you're asking me to undo it. That feels unsafe to me. See, I didn't know that at the time. I didn't understand that the steps they weren't meeting me at the underbelly of my suffering. They were telling me I was in my ego, that I needed to just shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
And otherwise I was burning my life to the ground like I always had. And instead it was, no, actually, I need someone to meet me in a space where I can have a God that tells me I'm worthy of forgiveness because I'm punishing myself into perpetuity, particularly in this marital crisis, right? Because even though my intuition was trying to say something isn't right, Sam, this doesn't make any sense. He fucking married you. If he's this mad, why did he marry you? He's doing something. My shame voice, my perfectionism spoke much, much louder and said, this is what you fucking get for what you did. So here's what happened, right? Here's where I'm going to get to the answer to that very, very important question, right? Because what do we do when we've created so much quote unquote success with being so perfect and so good and such a good producer of things? And we're actually stuck under the weight of this voice of guilt and shame 24/7. So we're doing so well, and yet we're kind of dying a slow spiritual death. Okay. Because this was my life at this point. I sleep on so many friends' couches during this marital crisis because I had enough sobriety to go, my husband and I were fighting every day. I was in a fit of rage. I was kicking my leg through the wall of this apartment we were living in. And it was unbearable for me, but I was terrified to leave. I wasn't ready to leave the marriage. Right. So I sleep on couches for about 8 months until finally, and I'm begging him to come back home. Can I just come? Will you love me now?
Wow.
Will you forgive me now? I mean, I had no sense of self or self-worth. He was my higher power. That's what was so dangerous.
Was he kind of disconnected from the cheating and it was just trying to heal and there's some resentment?
Oh, we'll get to that.
Okay.
He was disconnected, all right. And that was part of it. I had a friend look at me in the eye in sobriety and say, you cannot live like this. You need to find a place that is your own so you can heal. This is fucking insane. So I sign a lease for 6 months. I was so scared because to me, that was like the real admittance that I had lost control of my husband over changing his mind, right? I was like, this is fucking serious, Samantha. This is evidence that everything you've done your whole life is collapsing. And that was rock bottom. I remember it was an unfurnished apartment. I got a mattress. It was on the floor. It was a loft apartment. So 16-foot ceilings. I'm looking up the ceiling and I'm just fucking sobbing, thinking, what am I going to do now? What am I going to do? I don't even know how to soothe myself to sleep. I literally had no clue. My mom used to stroke my head as a girl. Then I used drugs and alcohol. Then I got sober and my husband did it for me. And here I am in this apartment living alone for the first time in my life. And I don't even know how to calm myself down. And this woman comes into my life at the time who was in multiple 12-step programs. And she said, we need to do the steps on your marriage. We need to stop focusing on alcohol and cocaine. I understand that's a thing. And if we don't treat the spiritual side of this, maybe that's something that will sound good to you. But right now, let's change the language to I'm powerless over my husband. And whether he's telling me the truth and whether he'll ever forgive me for what happened on the front end and the future of our marriage and what happened in the past. And when I try to exert power over this man who I cannot control, my life becomes unmanageable in the following ways. So we run through the steps in this way. Here's the breakthrough. We get to step 9, which is making an amends. And it was the first time anyone in my whole life said, have you ever made an amends to yourself? And I hadn't. And every woman who's running on perfectionism needs to do this work, in my opinion. Because I don't care if you think you have shame or just a little bit of guilt and regret somewhere in your life, if it not in one area, in many areas, right? Family, work, your body image. What happened? Well, this woman giving me permission to forgive myself for anything that happened with my husband before we got married opened up the possibility that I couldn't keep talking to myself the way that I was. Because if I was going to be a person who was worthy of love and forgiveness, then that person would never say, this is what you fucking get for what you did. Which meant that my consciousness was so elevated for the days and weeks and months I was doing this work, where every time I heard my critical voice show up, I said,
No.
shit, that's not going to cut it. What would someone say who forgives themselves? What would she say instead? Then I started do you want to talk about loops? This is how you start to create a new feedback loop in the healing process. So I start rigorously discovering a self-compassionate way of speaking. I start to become curious instead of self-ridiculing. And the miracle of doing this work is that my intuition showed back up.
Her voice sounded nothing like my critical voice. It was, I say, the four C's. It had the quality of it was clear, it was compassionate, it was calm, and it was curious. So, for example, in those early weeks of living in this apartment, she said, I'll never forget this. When I was sobbing one night, not knowing how to go to bed by myself, she said, you're going to have to put your arms around yourself. It was so awkward. It was so startling. But also it was so gentle and loving, and it sounded nothing like my critical voice, and I had nothing to lose. I had lost everything, myself being the most important. And I thought, oh, okay. And I put my arms around myself and just cried myself to sleep, to help myself. That was the first act of love I had shown myself, arguably, since I was a little girl. And my intuitive voice continued to nudge me in new directions. And, the miracle of doing this kind of healing work is that today, right, I've had all this practice. So I was 5 years sober when I first started to do this real healing work. So now I'm 16 years sober. So I would say for 11 years, I've been in deep communion with my intuition. That doesn't mean that my perfectionist voice, my critical voice, my controlling voice doesn't have a seat at the table. She does. He's part of me, and she shows up when I feel scared. She shows up to try to protect me like she did when I was Earl. So the work is not to get rid of her. The work is not to numb her and suppress her and to be so busy all the time that I can just shut up the sound of her voice. The work is to honor her existence and have my highest self, my capital S self, my intuitive self, lovingly say, I'm with you, baby.
Yeah.
I know why you're here. I understand.
It's crazy because I love what you're saying, that I feel like, and probably men deal with this, but I know women, they deal with kind of like listening to this guilt and this shame, and it actually prevents you from doing what you're called to do. And for me, I'm like, it's a human emotion, right? And I feel like every woman has this moment where you're like, I'm tired of living in fear, guilt, and shame. Like, I'm just so sick of it. I've had moments in my life where I'm just like, I refuse to be guided and led by this. This is stupid. God doesn't want us to feel this. It's a human experience and an emotion. It's, to me, I always tell myself, like, hey, it's just a friendly reminder. Like, you kind of went too far this way and you're feeling bad about it, but like, don't live in the space of guilt. And I think, like you said, it's like focusing on, like, you're an overachiever, but you're human, and you're going to have that voice pop back in, that ego is going to come back in, but learning how to use it to your advantage, and understanding, like, you can kind of continue to push forward and not say, oh, I'm never going to feel guilt and shame. Like, we're human, right? But learning how to navigate it and have the tools and the steps to lead you through it. So you've kind of learned how to navigate this through the guilt and shame and that kind of thing inside of not only your sobriety, but now inside of your relationship. So in that moment when you're in your apartment and you're kind of like feeling like you're finally giving yourself love, what would you say to women who have that ego, who have that voice? Is it something that you, and I've heard on some of like your Instagram stories and things like that, you're a believer in, like, you've got to talk positive to yourself. Touch base on that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's as simple and as complicated as this. Let's take an example of a mom, a working mom, and she snaps at her child because she's just exhausted, right? And she doesn't show up as her best self. The following thoughts might sound something like, why the fuck did you just do that? The shift is, why did I just do that?
Right.
One is criticizing and one is curious. You want to get curious without blame or shame so that you can do the work required to treat the exhaustion. You make the amends to your child, you amend your behavior going forward, and you release the guilt and shame. Period. You take radical accountability.
Yeah.
But you have to self-reflect first.
Yeah.
There is no God in blame or shame. There is no accountability in blame or shame. It's the opposite. It's victimhood.
Right.
Right?
I love that you just said that, like, get curious. Because, like, even there's times I'll snap at Garrett, and then I literally am like, why? Like, we'll go to bed and I'll wake up the next morning and I'll be like, I'm sorry. I'm like, that was like the perfect cocktail of disaster because stress and kids and that. I'm like, I'm not really, my reaction is not an excuse, but like I understand why why it happened, and not putting myself in like, oh, you're such a piece of shit for saying that or doing that. It's like, why did I react that way? And then it's like, okay, now I know there's certain conversations I'm not going to have late at night with my husband, with business and whatever, because that might trigger that kind of response. And so it's like you said, not navigating, asking yourself, why did that happen? And then knowing like, okay, if I don't want that to happen, then I have to create the environment to not put myself in that situation. But again, it's like, we're all human and we're all going to snap. So even then I always say, like, well, you're going to have human moments, but it's the awareness that you're talking about and the curiosity that you're talking about that I think is the game changer. So you went sober, you were doing good, and then you were in this place, you're in the apartment. Let's go back to there. You're in the apartment. When did things start to shift inside of your marriage?
Woo! Oh, it would take a little longer, Danielle. So here's what happened. I do the 12 steps in this very curated way around the marriage, and I'm healing. I'm feeling so back in touch with my truest self. He and I are going to therapy. We're living separately. We're sort of talking again, and it feels like, oh my God, I think this is going to work out. I think this is going to work out.
So you're in the apartment, you have this experience where you finally feel like this self-love. From there, having this ability to have this self-love, how did that impact your marriage, and where did it start to sort of shift inside of your relationship?
Yeah. So my 6-month lease was going up, and at this time we thought, okay, I'm going to move back in. But my intuition spoke up and said, you should keep this apartment. You should turn it into your first business. Because I was starting to see some holes in the healthcare industry, surprise, surprise, or people's needs were not being met. And what I mean by that is, people would get discharged at 60% better, and they were hiring out trainers and yoga instructors to pay them cash 3 times as much as I was making as a doctor to make them 100% better. So I asked the landlord, because it was a mixed-use building, I said, can I turn this into a little fitness studio? And he said, yes. So I keep the place. And I moved back home. So Strong Heart Fitness was born from my marital crisis. I moved back home, and within a couple of days of being there, I know immediately that it's no longer me. Whatever's happening in my marriage had nothing to do with me, because this man still couldn't look me in the eye. He was still going on all the trips. He was still taking his wedding ring off. He was still rejecting me sexually. And I looked at him and I said, I don't want to do this. Not only do I not want to do this, I don't deserve this. I would never been able to say that before. He dropped to his knees and he begged me to stay. And my intuition said, don't worry, Sam, you just moved back in. You're going to find out everything you need to know, whether you stay or go. So I listened to her, and I was tired, so I stayed. He went on one more trip. I knew it was a lie. I was super relaxed about it. He comes home on a Monday night, collapses on top of me and says, you're going to be the mother of my children one day. Now, turns out I am the mother of his children. But the very next day, I got an email from the woman he had been having a 5-year extramarital affair with. And it started before I got sober because he was a good little enabler who loved me and stayed with me through my addiction, through all my cheating, and he should have left, but he didn't know how. You hear about people like this, right? Like you stay in something that you know isn't right for you, and eventually you do something that makes you leave, or you sabotage it in a way because speaking up for yourself is too scary. So he cheats on me, and then I get sober. So even in my early sobriety, as we get engaged, I have no clue that this happened. And he takes the secret and buries it, hoping he can function in two places at once. Then we actually get married. And I'm thinking everything's going to be great. But I'm a newcomer in recovery. Now, this is not, by the way, not to blame anything that he did on myself. No. But the truth is, in recovery, in my early sobriety, I didn't believe in God. I was running on controlling and managing and manipulating the world around me, especially my husband. So every time I didn't get what I wanted or what I needed, it was an issue, and I was coming at him hard. And so the part of the fighting was that I was exhausting to him, and he didn't have his voice. So he eventually reached out to her. As soon as he opened that door again, game over. He basically said, just so you know, if you end this with me, Sam's shit is all over the internet. I will email her. I will call her. I will show up to your house in LA, and I will tell her everything. So basically, he was being blackmailed for 2.5, 3 years. So that whole time that I was like, what the fuck is going on? I know you're fucking cheating on me. I'm not the cheater. No. You're a cheater.
Oh, wow. Projecting it back on you. But you knew something was going on.
I did. But again, my shame was way louder than my intuition. And so every time I wanted to trust myself, I couldn't.
So basically, when I moved back in and I looked him in the eye and I said, I'm done. For him, the jig was up. It was over. This straddling between two lives had blown up in his face. So he was trying so hard not to have me ever find out what had happened. And at the end of the day, I didn't even need to know. I was that unhappy in the marriage that I had done all the work to know I deserved better. I just looked him in the eye and said, it's over. So for him, he was like, well, now I've literally lost the thing I was trying to not lose.
To save, yeah.
By keeping it a secret. So now fuck this woman. I'm fucking ending it. For making my life a living hell, right? So he ends it with her, and she kept her promise. She sent me an email the next day of the whole story, all the photographs of them together over all the years, all the receipts of the hotels they stayed in, the I love yous, the text exchanges.
Right.
So what did I do? I took his shit and threw it out on the sidewalk like a Lifetime movie. I said, you get the fuck out. I'm tired of moving. Then he kept coming around for the weeks after that, memorializing our lives together. And my intuition and I were just such buddies. And she said, Sam, you could stay here with all these tainted memories, and he's going to keep coming around and not respect your boundaries, or you could just move again, start over. Like, you know how to move. You've done this already. So I had my business, I had my sweet little space. Okay. And then I got a 1-bedroom apartment about 2 miles away. And I had all the sex in all the land. I was like an animal coming out of captivity. It was glorious.
Because you were faithful that whole time.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow.
It was torture.
Yeah.
It was torture. But again, right here I was, this wild addict who was so hypersexual. That was part of how I got validation, right? Was to be over sexualized. And then I got in this marriage, and it's like I have my tail between my legs. We had no sex. And a lot of the time I was being told, it was because of me and things about me and my body that he didn't want. I mean, I was so destroyed in my self-esteem. By the time I did all this work and I found that out, I was like, Woo!
Yeah, yeah.
Bring it on, baby. I mean, the stories from that time in my life are hilarious. Actually, I could really have my own Sex in the City season. They're that good. And about 8 months into that, and I'm hiring a lawyer. I'm getting ready to file for divorce. I'm just sure I'm done. My intuition spoke up. By the way, he had started going to his own 12-step program, which,
wow.
there's multiple programs for people who are on the other side of the addiction coin, and therapy and all the things I was begging him to do for all those years, he had
Right.
finally started to do. So that sort of nudged me in this direction where my intuition said, "Are you sure you're done?"
Wow.
And I was just so angry, right? My critical voice, my betrayed self, my everything, all the people around me, because I was in California now and they had only seen me sober. So everyone in California was like, "You're not going to fucking take this guy back, right?" So I was kicking and screaming when my intuition said that.
Did you like the wild? I mean, I feel like anybody who goes through the breakup, they have their like kind of like wild redemption, as you called it. Did that phase of your life kind of get unfulfilling and kind of like, I don't really want this either?
Of course. Oh yeah. It was completely unfulfilling. I mean, it was
fun.
it served its purpose, but it was so superficial, right? It
Right.
was never gonna cure
Right.
my broken heart,
Right.
right? Whether I stayed with my husband or not. And when my intuition spoke up and I was kicking and screaming, she just said back to me, this is how close I became with myself, my capital S self. She said, "You know what, Sam? If you want to go, go. You have fought the good fight. I love you and I support whatever decision you make. But if you think there's something left here that you might be happy on the other side of this mess with this man, you might need to stay."
Is it that clear for you when it comes through?
It is. Always. And so I sat with that deliberation for several more months, and I would just meditate with no intention of trying to find an answer, but I would just meditate. And I always had the same vision, which was me looking through a dark tunnel with no end in sight, and there was a little match lit at the end. And I couldn't help but think that that was the flicker of hope that required me to stay and fight the good fight. And so him and I started dating again. And we moved really, really slow. And when that lease went up in that apartment, I moved back in. And we have been together on the other side of that betrayal for 11 years with 2 beautiful children.
How does that, I mean, Garrett and I have shared this on many podcasts. In the beginning of our relationship, after 2 kids, he had an emotional affair with another woman. And it was really hard for me to forgive him for a long time. I mean, it probably took 5 years. I started my own bank account, was stockpiling cash. Like I was creating an escape route.
Yep.
How did you going through feeling so betrayed, how did you heal? How did you trust him again? I'm sure it was a long process, but talk to the audience about that. Cause I think a lot of people just think like, oh, how could she go back to him? Like, well, he's a piece of shit or da 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 da. And you're like, you have to actually find that chemistry and let go of that resentment. How did you do it for you?
Yeah, one thing I can say, which was really a miracle, even in the very beginning of finding out, that I was able to do was to pull back. The way that when we meditate, we're sort of observing things from a different place in our mind. I was able to zoom all the way back, spiritually speaking, and look at the arc of our story. Now, this is different than the emotional place I was in. Emotionally, I wanted to fucking die, okay? And I want to make that very clear. But spiritually, I thought, okay, Samantha, you two have been together since you were 20 years old. You really loved each other deeply. And you two were just absolute fools, just reckless young kids who did not know anything at all, right? And you were the untreated addict and he was the untreated enabler. And here you are, having lied and cheated and behaved in a way that you're not proud of, and you're a sober woman with dignity and grace. Do you think that is possible for him too? Do you think he's a chronic cheater? that there's no hope for, that he, he has no real desire to change, that this is literally just you being delusional and he's just going to hurt you again, and that he never really loved you in the first. But like, what do you really believe when you look at the whole arc of the story? And what I really believed was that he too could recover from this seemingly hopeless state, and that he really loved me, and that this was not a stamp on his character, that he actually was a good man who made a fucking horrible mistake. So that's number one. I believe from my own story, and that it was true for me, that it also could be true for him. Very fucking powerful. Then in the early weeks and months, I would be in the kitchen, seemingly doing something that had nothing to do with what happened between us, right? Washing the dishes, and I would say something like, whatever I would say, I would complain about, and he would dismiss what I said. He would be very just like irritated and just, and I would go from fucking 0 to 10. I would just want to cut him with my tongue. And then you go, whoa, what is happening right now? And I had enough sobriety and tools to go, oh my God, it had nothing to do with the dishes. Which, by the way, ladies, it never has to do with the dishes. It never has to do with the dishes. And I would go, oh my God, that dismissal was exactly what he did when I looked and said, I know you're fucking cheating on me. Just tell me the truth.
So it triggered
And
that
he
emotion.
And he said, I'm not the cheater, you're the cheater. And I would come back to him and I would say, I just got so triggered emotionally from the past. And I took it out on you in this moment. This is so fucking hard. And I would usually be crying. And he would meet me and hug me and hold me while I sobbed, which required so much vulnerability from him. And he said, I am so sorry. I love you.
Wow.
Now,
I love that you just shared that specific story, because I think a lot of women, I take Garrett 10 years ago and I punish him for Garrett 10 years ago.
100%.
And then I'm like, why did I just say that? He's not even that person anymore, but it's that trigger, and then being aware of that trigger and then not turning it into a fight. And it truthfully takes two people to be like, oh, fuck, I'm sorry. I don't know why I said that, and kind of like almost surrender to one another.
Yep. Yeah. This is the kind of work that people are very, very afraid to do.
Yeah.
And that they don't have the skills to do, to be honest.
Right.
The next part of this is our intimacy. Because even after I intellectually and on many levels emotionally began to start forgiving him and really believing he was in this with me 100%, I remember feeling like a prisoner in our sex life.
Wow.
What do I mean by that? Well, I would eventually reach orgasm, but not without torture between my ears. I was thinking about everything I liked that he was doing and that I didn't like that he was doing. And then I was thinking, did he do this with her? Remember the time he said that thing about your body? I mean, it was fucking hell. Hell. And I remember, and I wasn't sharing any of this with him, by the way. I remember calling my therapist, who knew the whole story. And I said, you know what? We had a baby, by the way, already. We had one baby so far. Wow. And now I'm still struggling, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, maybe this is just where our story ends. Like, I've done everything I can, and I love him. I will always love him. But I just don't know if I can get this part back. And she said, let me ask you something. Is there anything else he can say or do to show you he loves you? He's all in. He wants you. He's a great husband and a great father. And I really had to think about that, because if there was, I was going to ask him to step up and do it. That's the least he could do, right? But the answer was no.
Wow.
Like, he fucking wanted me the way he used to, the way I had wanted him to want me for so long. There was nothing else. And so then it occurred to me that the only person who could let me out of this fucking cage was me. What did that mean? What did that look like? The analogy was, in my addiction, I was this wild animal that could not be contained. Then I get sober, He's angry. He's pulling away. And I just go back. I get locked in a cage. He locks the door and I'm in the cage with my tail between my legs, like an ashamed little creature that will never act badly again, ever, ever. I'm so sorry I did this to you. Then I find out he cheats on me and I fucking bust out, right? And I go crazy again. Animal in the wild, but now I'm sober, right? So I have more agency over myself. I get back in the relationship. What I realized on this therapy call was that I was back in the cage, but the door was open.
Wow.
And I put myself in there and I had to get myself out. Now, what that meant, and women listening, no matter whether this is a fraction of your story or not, most women have what's called, this is science, responsive desire. Men have spontaneous desire. So women need to be reminded, we need to remember that we like to be touched and that orgasm is actually very enjoyable once we can get ourselves there. But men can just think of sex and they want to have sex.
Yeah.
It's so we've all had our struggles with this regardless of the backstory, right? Mine happens to be extreme. But this advice, I think, is super helpful, but it requires a lot of courage. I said to myself, I will never again do anything sexually that I'm not enjoying. If he is making out with me, you know, like teenagers do to get things going, and I'm just not into it, I will not keep doing it. I decided that at every single moment of our sexual intimacy, I was going to honor the call of my body. Body, what do you want now? What do you want now? Oh, you want to flip over? Great. You want to put his hands here? Do it. You want to take out your fucking vibrator and you do it. Do it, do it, do it. Do not think, do. Do not second guess. Trust yourself. Yeah. We have the most amazing sex life. But I will tell you, as you shared, if I knew it was going to take 6-7 years to thaw out in this kind of way from the betrayal, I probably would never have stayed.
Yeah.
I'm glad nobody told me.
Yeah. It's crazy because I'm listening to your story and I have a lot of like similar stories. And actually,
I knew that you would.
The thing is that even when you're talking about sex, I think a lot of women can relate to this. They're real stiff. We call it pincushion sex or vaginal masturbation, where you're just like, you're so uncomfortable with like yourself or your thoughts are going. And it's like, why are you allowing this disconnection with this person that you love? And I do agree with you. Guys can flip it on and we're all in our head about it. But one of the things that helped me, like kind of, I was in a similar situation, but it was resentment, guilt, whatever. And then I was like, I want to have good sex. I remember like telling myself, like, I'm tired of putting myself in this prison and I refuse to do this anymore. So for me and women listening to this, I would also encourage you, you have to have reps to be good at something. You have to listen to your body. You have to almost like be the director in the bedroom. So I love that you like shared that. And when you can get to that place where you're comfortable with yourself, your man's like, holy shit, like you just got that much more sexy. So I think it takes reps, because in the beginning it can be awkward and uncomfortable because we've trained ourselves to mentally kind of like shut down in that way. So I'm actually like glad that you shared this on the show. And I think that it will be very, very helpful to women. So you have a kid, you figured out how to build that trust back. It took 7 years. You have a beautiful daughter, son.
Well, our first baby was a boy, and now we have our daughter too, and they're 6 and 9.5 now, right? So we've been sort of trudging along, and all the while, right? Remember that apartment was my business, and I ended up expanding it, and I had this thriving private practice doing physical therapy, treating whole body, whole person. And all the while I'm gathering all this time in sobriety, right? I'm navigating this crazy marital crisis and recovery, and life is really in session. And I'm starting to notice in my patients that are not addicts, what I call soul sickness. They're not addicted to cocaine and alcohol like I was, but they seem addicted to things like people pleasing and perfectionism and the beauty and body standard. And I thought, God damn it, all of that is getting in the way of their body being pain-free, which is why they hired me. So at what point can I actually treat the spiritual malady that I'm seeing? But that's not really within the scope of my practice, and that's not why they hired me. And then on March 13th in 2022, I lost my big sister Jessica to a drug overdose.
Oh, wow.
And I had been trying to save her life for over a decade.
Wow.
And I had done all the things they tell you not to do, you know, begging and pleading and pushing the 12-step program on her, which, by the way, you know, the 12 steps now became the anchor point of what my book is about. Because when my sister died, I said, I cannot just treat the body. I'm writing a fucking book, and the book is going to be about the spiritual side of health and wellness. I didn't know at the time that what I was going to be doing was reinventing the 12 steps. But when I got really honest about what saved my life in recovery, it is when I did those steps in a modern and more trauma-informed way, right? Because that woman said, have I ever made an amends to myself? That's not in the 12 steps. And it fucking should be.
Wow.
The fact that addicts are literally dousing themselves with substance, the fact that women are dousing themselves with people-pleasing and perfectionism is because we feel shame. We at some point did not feel enough. And we figured out ways to be loved and accepted by the world around us. And in adulthood, that shit is fucking killing our spirit. So why are we not meeting people from that place to say, you do not have to be ashamed for anything that happened to you. You do not have to punish yourself into perpetuity by working to the bone and saying yes to everyone else's dreams except your own. This is not the way forward. This is not sustainable. This is not what you want your fucking kids to learn. So my book is not a message, it's a movement. I am literally trying to put the 12 steps at the tip of people's tongues as a blueprint for how to get through life's hardest things, right? So, you know, I used to just be a body coach, but now I'm a spiritual mentor. Yes, I'm a doctor of physical therapy, and yes, I can get you out of pain and into movement patterns that will prevent injury, which is, by the way, a fucking superpower. Because if we want to live these long lives and grow up and get rich and go on these fabulous trips in our retired years, well, guess what? You're not going to be able to do that if your body is in pain, if you've not been taking proper care of it.
Right.
So I feel like just that alone, I have the keys to the kingdom. But now I have this spiritual blueprint that I take people through on whatever the pain point is. I have people I'm coaching right now who are in loveless marriages. They're not addicts, but they're addicted to their resentment.
Gives them purpose.
It gives them a reason. I should have fucking left this man 20 years ago. What the fuck is wrong with me? And now because she feels like she can't, because her time is up, the window of opportunity is gone, she's just going to stay in a fit of rage and split herself into two and go live this other life over here. But in the four walls that are her home, she's a fucking prisoner. Right? And I coach people out of that cage.
Right.
And I know exactly what it's like to be stuck inside of it.
That's crazy.
So the work I do today is so meaningful to me. It is everything. I mean, I am trying, you know, much like Garrett, to speak on stages. Like if there was a woman in the arena tour, I'm the fucking woman, right? Like I am on a mission to save lives and save souls. And I sometimes wonder, you know, is this your latest attempt to save people because you couldn't save your sister? And the truth is, maybe it is. Maybe there's some unhealed trauma that's driving this, but I'm aware of that. And number one, if that's true in any part, I could think of worse things to be doing with my life. That's one. Number two, I tried the best that I could living as a sober example. Right? At the end of my sister's life, I knew she had relapsed. I knew she was lying to me. And it scared the shit out of me that I was going to get that fucking phone call. But I knew I was not her higher power. And I knew that the best thing I could do for her, for my family, for my children, is to be the lighthouse. And so I don't know what would have or could have saved her life, but I know what saved mine.
Right. And now you can help other people. It's crazy.
Exactly.
I think that sometimes, although it's not what we want in life, it's part of the plan. And it may have even kind of tipped you off to, like you said, write the book. You have this like secret that you have to share. Like it is now your calling. in
That's
which
right.
you would be doing yourself and thousands a disservice. And when you look at it like that, you're like, wow, this is my mission. This is what I'm going to do. You've gone through it. You know, you've walked through it. So you're more than qualified. And so now it's how you lived your life is now to pay it forward to other people. So
Exactly.
I love it. What's your book called?
Breaking the Circuit.
Breaking the Circuit. I love that. When did it go out?
It came out June 10th last year.
Okay.
So we're not even a year old yet. And, you know, the two things I'm doing the most right now are coaching people and speaking on stages about this.
Okay.
And yeah, in my bones, when I close my eyes and I see the future, I see speaking to thousands and thousands of people. I see selling out arenas, not from an ego place, but just this is it for me.
It's an accepting of a calling.
For me.
Yeah.
It is a calling.
Yeah.
It is my calling.
So if people want to coach with you one-on-one, where can they find you and where do they go?
Yeah, you guys can DM me. I'm very responsive on Instagram at Dr. Samantha Hart, but also on my website, and everywhere, both on Instagram and my website, is a really easy call to action to book a discovery call with me. And it's free, and it says 30 minutes, but I've stayed on these calls with people for an hour or sometimes 90 minutes because that connection and finding out where a person is really at and meeting them there is everything to me.
Right.
And if we're a good fit, we're going to know.
Right. Love that. Well, I resonated with everything you said. I'm glad that you're sharing. I'm so grateful to have you on this podcast. I think as women, we need more people speaking up. Otherwise, we feel so alone and we find ourselves, like you referred to, in the cage so often. We don't feel like we can talk to anybody. And we ultimately tell us the story of like, you can't get out. And so many women get in this place of where I can't get out, where now it's their purpose in life. And it's such a low vibration and level of consciousness. And so you're going to break people free. I know it. I can see it in you. And you know what? Maybe we do a woman in the arena thing. We don't know.
Fuck yes. That's what I'm talking about.
It's funny because Garrett's like, he's doing his man in the arena thing. And he's like, we've had so many of the men's wives or women are like, where's women in the arena? And I'm like, oh shit, I know I'm going to end up doing this. I'm going to call a bunch of powerful ladies together and we're going to see what happens. So, but it was amazing to have you on the show. You guys check her out, Dr. Samantha Hart on Instagram. You heard her. If this is resonating to you, set up a call with her, DM her. See if it's a good fit. If you know somebody who's like, oh my God, my sister or somebody could benefit from this, just reach out to her, because this is where it's all about. Like, I do this show because I want to impact, I want to share. So if you're listening to this, the thing that I ask you to do, share this show, because it was incredible content. I know it got a little fuzzy for a minute, but it was such an amazing story. And I'm truly passionate when other people are brave enough to share their stories because the impact they know it will have. So thank you so much for being here on the show. I feel like you got more of a story. We need like a part 2 session of this.
I have so much, but we covered
we covered a lot. I wanted to kind of like get a scope of it, but you guys message me if you want her on the show again. We'll go more into the story. So thank you again so much for being here. Thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to share, and we'll see you on another episode of the Danielle K. White Show.